Thank you, Aaron. Hello, everyone. My name is Dennis Tortop. I'm a business development manager with Amazon Web Services. And today I'm here with you with Scott Zimmerman, solutions architect for Amazon Web Services. We'll be talking about line of business applications powered by Microsoft SQL Server on Amazon Web Services. We'll give you options for hosting your databases on AWS. Let me say a few words about agenda, and then we're going to go into an intro for Amazon Web Services, and Scott is going to take over to discuss the various different options of hosting your databases, line of business applications powered by SQL Server on AWS. First, we understand that cost effectiveness is an important area of consideration for a lot of our customers. So we're going to discuss that. We're going to go into security after that, reliability and performance benefits of hosting line of business applications in the AWS cloud, including those that run on SQL Server. Then we're going to discuss offloading database infrastructure management tasks so you can focus on your core competencies and customer relationships. AWS will give you many different options should you choose to host your databases on AWS. And we're going to discuss the self-service options. We're going to discuss the fully managed options. And then finally, licensing considerations we understand and recognize are important for many of Microsoft customers. Finally, we're going to discuss how to use your existing licenses, including SPLA, Service Provider License Agreement, EA, Enterprise Agreement, and HISV, Hosted ISV, Hosted Independent Services Software Vendor, to run Windows Server and SQL Server on AWS while enjoying Amazon EC2 Linux rates. Kind of comparable to buying a server without an operating system and bringing your own. We also call it BYOL. Without further ado, let's say a few words about why Amazon Web Services. We do have a brief question for you. So Aaron, if you want to take over.
Absolutely. So we have the first of three polls now open. Which relational database engines does your organization host for customers? So please note, if you are viewing in full screen mode, you may have to adjust the presentation to see the poll. We'll leave the poll open for about 30 seconds, and then we'll close that out and read the results out in percentage form.
All right. While you guys fill out the question, I'll continue with why Amazon Services, and then as Scott takes over in a little bit, he can discuss the outcome with you. So AWS has been in business for now over 9.5 years, almost 10 years. And we'd like to say it's extremely difficult to compress the experience algorithm. We've learned quite a bit as we made an effort to provide an end-to-end service with many different products and services. Like I said, we learned a lot from it. Our uptime reflects it. Our customer satisfaction reflects it. Our broad set of services, over 50 now, reflect it as well. We had over 500 service improvements in 2014. Last year in 2015, that number was over 700. We now have 32 availability zones spanning 12 regions. Most recently, we launched one in Seoul, Korea. Our availability zones are independent data centers. And the way our regions work, there are at least 2 AZs, as we like to call them, availability zones in each region that are a few miles apart. That's far enough apart to provide unparalleled redundancy, but it's close enough to have dark fiber networks and between them for things like real-time replication and highly available solutions without any latency. Last but not least, we're also capable of delivering 48,000 I/O operations per instance. So we have some pretty thick walls between our virtual machines and can deliver unparalleled performance. We have a broad ecosystem with more than 1 million customers across more than 190 countries. We got thousands of consulting and technology partners enrolled in our Amazon Partner Network, AWS Partner Network. And with our customer focus, we proactively reached out to many customers through our AWS Trusted Advisor notifications and saved our customers over $350 million through those notifications. We made a habit of reducing prices as our cloud grows, our prices go down, and since 2006, we issued 48 price reductions. We are trusted by enterprises around the world. There are some logos out on the screen. We have many different types and sizes of the customers, not only enterprises, but also hot startups and public sector companies. And we recognize many of you today are services providers. Two that I like to highlight are Rackspace and DataPipe. They're both SPLA customers of Microsoft, and they have deep partnerships with AWS. A few words about AWS Services Framework. EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud, S3, Simple Storage Service, are the two cornerstone services that we have, but a lot of times why our customers become customers. But we also have many surrounding services, over 50 now. I like to call it, customers a lot of times come to AWS for EC2 and S3, but they stay with AWS for those surrounding services. Just to highlight a few, RDS, Relational Database Services, we're going to talk quite a bit about it as a managed database service. Elastic Load Balancer allows you to load balance your virtual machines for both redundancy as well as for load distribution. Direct Connect allows you to connect your data center to ours over private lines, both for high performance as well as for security. VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, allows our cloud to act as an extension of yours using the same IP address space and subnet masks. CloudFormation allows you to do automated processing of tasks end-to-end, so you can spin off, say, SharePoint farms or redundant SQL servers on the AWS cloud. Auto-scaling will allow you to scale your infrastructure up and down based on load, so you don't have to optimize for peak performance. You could scale your infrastructure rapidly in case of increasing load and vice versa. Elastic Block Storage is one of our storage offerings that you can attach to your instances and detach from your instances. OpsWorks supports DevOps. Elastic Beanstalk supports contained code execution. Identity Access Management is our solution for assigning individual permissions for professionals on your network or groups. VM Import Export will allow you to take your on-premises virtual machines and licensing keys and export them to the AWS network and vice versa. And we do have many plugins, including those for System Center and VMware. Just to highlight a few of those services, it is very important for a lot of our customers to connect their data centers to the AWS cloud in a seamless manner. We totally understand that the vast majority of our customers choose to keep their existing investment while complementing it with bits and pieces of the AWS cloud. So 5 of the services that we just discussed: Direct Connect, VPC, VM Import and Export, CloudFormation, and Identity Access Management help you do just that. Direct Connect, like I said earlier, is a direct line between your data center and ours that does not go over the public internet lines. If cost is an issue, VPN could be a good alternative. And VPC, like I said earlier, allows you to keep your own subnets and IP address space in the AWS cloud, allowing AWS clouds to act as a transparent extension of your data centers. So the servers that are in your data center don't even know that the servers in our data center is not in yours. VM Import and Export, very powerful tool that has the ability to process up to 20 virtual machines in parallel. It can allow you to rapidly move your virtual machines back and forth between the AWS cloud and yours, along with your licenses and license keys. And Identity Access Management will allow you to use your same users in your network in ours. It is also possible to, if you're using Active Directory, using our directory service, to provision users already authenticated by your directory as if they're authenticated in ours. So fairly seamless, transparent experience. With that said, we have the survey still on the screen. I turn it over to Scott to continue along.
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Zimmerman, and I'm a solutions architect for AWS, focusing on our Windows solutions. And first, I'm going to give you the results of the poll that you participated in. We had 75% interest in Microsoft SQL Server, and 25% are currently running MySQL and hosting that for your customers. So thank you very much for participating in that. So what I'm going to do now is go through the next few slides where we're going to talk a little more in depth to some of the capabilities that Dennis already outlined for you. First, I do want to clarify just, what are we talking about when we say LoB apps? It means line of business applications, and these are software programs that are really key and integral to a business's day-to-day operations. You often hear the term mission critical. These can be internally developed applications. It's very popular to run .NET applications with SQL Server. Literally millions of Microsoft shops are doing that, and we're going to talk about how AWS is an absolutely great home for those types of applications. But let's also not overlook the Microsoft Dynamics and SAP and other third-party line of business apps, including ERP. And so as Dennis was explaining, we have an extensive set of services. We now have over 50 web services that are in AWS built to help you host and run these applications for your customers. And most of them are based on databases, so that's the purpose of our webinar today, to show you how AWS is really a brilliant home for running SQL Server. Now, just as a reminder, we have Erin Hunter's email address at the bottom of each slide. Please feel free to email her with any questions about technical or licensing, and I'm going to be helping her out with any technical questions that may come in. We also have the Q&A panel in the lower right corner of the screen, and you can put in questions for us there that Dennis and I will get to as we trade off speaking throughout the rest of the session. All right, so let's talk about SQL Server. And these are a few of the sort of the highlight pillars, if you will, of what we like to think about and what our customers tell us is important to them. As we developed our solutions for SQL Server, we've heard that these 5 pillars are really the key of what customers are looking for. They want it to be very cost effective, and we're going to show you that we have a couple of different billing options and a couple of different technical variations on how you can host this, so that there's not just a one-size-fits-all, but it's a very flexible and cost-effective model for you to use. And again, like all AWS services, you only pay for what you use. You can shut it down at any time and not be paying for the service when you're not provisioning the resources in the cloud. Another key thing, and it's usually the most important, is for it to be secure. And there are we have a detailed white paper on this, and there's numerous ways that you can configure AWS and your environment in AWS to be secure. Now, what we like to say is that AWS takes the responsibility for securing the cloud, but you're going to secure what's in the cloud. So it's a shared responsibility model. And what that means is you're still going to be responsible for configuring your user profiles and your services and trying to make sure that you minimize your attack surface of any web-facing front-end web servers that you may have and so forth. We have detailed white papers and quick starts and blog articles and hands-on labs that go through all of those steps and show you the ways you can do that. It's also highly reliable. We provide service level guarantees and 4 nines of reliability for several of our services, and even 11 nines for durability when it comes to the S3 storage service that Dennis mentioned earlier. It's also very high performance. We have over 30 instance types. Now, an instance type is a virtual machine configuration of RAM and CPUs, and we give you over 30 types that you can choose from to vary that based on what your workloads demand. So you may have, for example, SQL Server needing a lot of CPUs, and it's a CPU intensive application. If your queries are actually CPU intensive, you can focus on that. Typically, though, you want to have SQL Server running on a memory intensive basis, and you want to make sure that you have lots of RAM available for SQL Server. And we provide instances that focus on that. So that way you're able to pick the most cost-effective type of hardware that you need, virtual hardware, if you will, for what you're doing. We also say that it is familiar. Now, the reason we say this is that running Windows workloads in AWS is exactly like you would do it in your own data center down the hall from your workstation. So literally, you can make the AWS cloud look like it's an extension of your data center, and you can manage it just as easily and more flexibly with more agility than you could on-premise. So let's go on. We'll talk more about some of these points as we go through the slides. Now, here are a couple of case studies that we have from some of our large customers. We have hundreds of enterprise Fortune 500 customers and case studies available on our site, but these are just a few of the highlights. One thing I'll mention here about Ziff Davis is they're emphasizing how we were able to help them cut costs. In the case of Hess, their focus was on, can we still run our 32-bit applications on Windows Server 2003? And yes, we are doing that. We're helping customers to maintain their 2003 environments that they have not yet been able to migrate off of. Even though support has ended for that platform, we're still able to run that in AWS and help them to migrate it to the newer 64-bit versions of Windows Server. Additionally, Expedia was very focused on performance, and they've got some measurements that they took there that show how they greatly improved performance by running in AWS. And there are many other case studies, as I said, that show different things that companies or customers are doing and the benefits that they're achieving. All right, so let's dive in now to talk about SQL Server. First thing I'm going to do is mention that we have two key options. At the top level, you can choose whether you want to run SQL Server inside of your own virtual machine in our service that's called EC2. And again, that means Elastic Compute Cloud. Now, in that case, you are installing SQL Server yourself. You're managing it just like you normally would as a DBA on your own platform. In the other case, where we have this service called Amazon RDS for relational database service, it is what we call a managed service where we provision a SQL Server database for you, and we do a number of the DBA management tasks for you. You're still responsible for your schema design and making sure your indexes are optimal and your queries are optimal and tuned, and you're still doing your importing and exporting of your data. So it's still your database, but we're able to take some of the work off of your shoulders for you and provide it as a managed service. So this is a spectrum between these two services. On the one hand, on the left-hand side of this slide, you see where you get more control and more power, but that means more work for you. On the right-hand side, you see where you give up some control, but the benefit being convenience. So think of Amazon RDS as being very useful in, say, a small work group that maybe they don't have a dedicated DBA resource, or think of it for a branch office where maybe the DBA can't get out to that site on a daily basis. So for certain workloads, Amazon RDS is ideal. It's spot on, and many customers find it to be a perfect solution for them. But be aware, if you are a serious DBA running a major enterprise application, Amazon RDS may have certain limitations that just are not right for your workload. And in that case, you want to run SQL Server in Amazon EC2. Now, once you've made that technical choice of which way are you, where do you fit on that spectrum, then you still have several other billing options or licensing options, which are listed here briefly, and Dennis is going to go into that in a bit more detail later. So the main thing was BYOL stands for Bring Your Own License, and we do provide you the ability to do that, especially on EC2, but in RDS you can do it just for SQL Enterprise. You must bring your own license. Now, you can run SQL Standard and SQL Enterprise on both services, on EC2 or RDS. And another point I would like to mention is when you're running in EC2, just because you've chosen to spin up your own instance and you're gonna run SQL Server on it, it doesn't actually mean that you have to install SQL Server and bring your own license. You do have the option there of purchasing from AWS on an hourly basis a Windows Server instance that already has SQL Server Standard or Enterprise installed inside of it. Now, in that case, what we're doing is we're including the Microsoft license with the cost of the virtual machine on an hourly basis. So if you shut down the instance, your license for Windows Server and SQL Server, those costs are not incurred anymore. But as long as you're running the instance, you're paying us for not only the hardware and the provisioning of the network and so forth, but also for the Windows license and the SQL Server license if you had chosen to launch your instance with SQL Server included. All right, so let me go next. That's just an overview. Now, the next two slides, we'll go into each of those options a little bit more. So this one focuses on EC2, and then the next slide we'll talk more about running RDS. So remember, when you're doing this in EC2, you are still in full control of how you set up and configure SQL Server. Even if you have SQL Server pre-installed with the Amazon machine image, when you're launching your instance, you are still the DBA in full control of how you configure that SQL Server. So things like setting SQL Server options and so forth, they're all available to you. Now, this is the most cost-effective option for hosting LoB apps on AWS. You can manage your software and the compute and the storage resources. So again, another example here is that you can specify how much RAM and storage are connected to the instance when you launch it. The AMIs that I talked about, again, that's Amazon Machine Image. When you go to launch an instance in EC2, you have to pick the AMI that you want to use. You can use your own if you use our VM import and export service. So let's say you have an image running on-premise in VMware. You could export it from VMware, import it into AWS, and launch that as an instance with all of your existing software already installed for you. All right, let's go on and take a look now at the SQL Server RDS option. And again, RDS stands for Relational Database Service. Now, this is the fully managed service that we provide, which is an option. And again, I said it's more of a convenient service. Think of it as a situation for departmental workloads or branch offices, perhaps. But there are Fortune 500 customers running applications on RDS. It works really well with websites. It just may not be as well suited for certain LoB apps. Now, if you have custom .NET apps, they can work very well with RDS. But in the case of certain LoB apps, like let's say an SAP or a dynamic CRM, there may be limitations that you would run into there where you would prefer to have SQL Server running in EC2, where you have more control. So in this case, let me tell you about some of the really convenient features. If you do want to use RDS, you're going to be able to take advantage of us doing some of the provisioning and the patching for you. So, for example, we're automatically keeping SQL Server patched and the Windows Server OS. The backup and recovery are being done for you automatically on a nightly basis. We're doing the backups. The other important thing to talk about here is many of you may be familiar with always-on availability groups in SQL Server Enterprise Edition. Well, we provide a similar feature here where all you have to do is check the box to say, I want to deploy my database across 2 availability zones. And that is a really powerful feature for just a simple checkbox. If you set up your own always-on availability group in SQL Server Enterprise, it takes considerable effort, and it's a very nice way to do it. Microsoft has built that feature very nicely, but we've turned it into just a checkbox in the Amazon RDS service. And also, RDS integrates with AWS Identity and Access Management, which is our service for granular resource permission control. So you can determine who you want to provide access to the database. Now, finally, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Dennis, I've got a couple of slides here that go into some depth, showing you a sample architecture, if you will. These are 2 different ways, diagram 1 and 2, of showing how SQL Server could be deployed in AWS. You'll see these kinds of diagrams in our white papers, so I want to walk you through this and help you understand the technical details a little bit, so when you come across these types of diagrams, you'll already be familiar with them. The first thing you notice is that we have an internet gateway on the left-hand side of the diagrams where users and remote administrators can come in through the internet gateway. Now, if you use the Direct Connect service that Dennis was talking about earlier, then that's a different connection point. You wouldn't be going through the internet gateway. You'd be connecting on-premise directly into your virtual private cloud, which you see in the center there of the diagram. Now, inside of your virtual private cloud, that is your network. Basically, you're just renting that network from AWS on an as-needed basis. Inside of there, you see that we have separate availability zones. In both diagrams, there's an orange inner dashed block there that shows you an AZ. Now those availability zones are like clusters of data centers that are separated by tens of miles in most cases. So they're on different floodplains and electrical grids and so forth, and they provide high availability when you design an architecture like you see here. The diagram 1 on the left is showing a model that might be very well suited to SharePoint server, where you have a network address translation server, you have a web front end, you have an application server, you have SQL Server, and you have Active Directory. Each one of those orange blocks there is an instance running in Amazon EC2. Now diagram 2 on the right is a similar model, but you'll notice that it has a blue highlighted box that spans 2 availability zones for the SQL Server Always On Availability Group. Now this is really powerful when you run Always On Availability Groups in AWS across 2 AZs. Many customers like to run always-on availability groups, but if you do that on premise, you're still really only getting a certain level of isolation there. Whereas in AWS, with the 2 AZs, you're being able to say, in case of a complete disaster at one geographic location, the other site could be able to continue running. And that's demonstrated there. But again, we have quick starts that show you how to set that environment up and detailed white papers that go into more depth about that. So I'm not going to go into more depth today, but I invite you to look at our website and see those white papers. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to Aaron, I think now, for a survey before we go on to Dennis.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, so our second poll is now open. Please take a moment to respond in the upper right in the Adobe Connect window. Do you have an active contract under any of the following Microsoft Volume licensing programs? Please check all that apply. Off to you, Dennis.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Scott. This is really helpful. So it sounds like a majority of our attendees today are on Microsoft's SPLA, Service Provider License Agreement. That is not very surprising. We've been getting a lot of attention from our service providers, from the service providers out there, we do understand that licensing can get complicated, especially when it comes to mixing and matching different types. So in this part of the presentation, we're going to discuss licensing options on AWS with focus on service provider licensing from Amazon. There are 2 main ways you could bring your software licenses over to the AWS cloud. One is buying licenses from AWS, and the other one is bringing licenses that you already purchased. There may be other options, including hybrid. So it is possible to mix and match, use some of it from us and some of it from Amazon. We also recognize that there are customers out there that are enjoying benefits of the enterprise agreement, especially when it comes to the privileges that Microsoft gives to those enterprise agreement customers that have their own intellectual property, self-hosting rights, basically, which is also possible to accommodate on AWS. But let's start with the option of buying licenses from AWS. You can buy Windows Server or Windows Server plus SQL Server licenses from AWS with EC2 and RDS instances. RDS in this context stands for Relational Database Services, as Scott outlined it just a few moments ago. If you did it that way, AWS would manage the licensing compliance for you. And then we do have a combination to support many current and legacy versions going all the way down to Windows 2003, the 32-bit option, as well as the 64-bit option. If you did it that way, we do license our Windows servers and SQL servers per CPU core. So you would not have to worry about user licenses. They would be licensed for unlimited users. That's awesome. That's great for externally facing workloads such as websites or contractor portals, customer portals. It's also great for those workloads that do not run 24/7. If your workloads are short-lived, this option will give you the flexibility to pay on an hourly basis if that's what you wish, or make reservations up to 3 years for discounts and exchange in excess of 70%, or up to 70%, I should say. The second option is bringing your existing licenses to AWS. And when it comes to bringing your own licenses to AWS, it can get a little complicated. Let me say a few words about license mobility. Using license mobility through software assurance or also using dedicated AWS infrastructure, it is possible to bring existing Microsoft licenses onto AWS. If you did that, you'd be taking advantage of the efficiencies of the cloud while still purchasing perpetual licenses, if that's what you wish. Or if you're paying as you go, perhaps through an agreement like SPLA, that may also be possible to bring your own SPLA to AWS using dedicated infrastructure. We're going to talk more about that in a couple of slides. It is also possible to extend the lifecycle of your software without additional hardware costs. We take care of the hardware for you, so you don't have to think about hardware refresh cycles, and you just pay AWS on an hourly basis or through reservations if that's what you wish. And then using existing virtual machine images, we touched on VM import and export. It is possible to export your own licensing keys and key management services over to AWS, so you don't have to worry about those. Microsoft License Mobility is a software assurance benefit from Microsoft and allows you to deploy licenses purchased for on-premises environments into cloud environments. License Mobility is available for agreements, including enterprise agreements, open and select, that are covered by software assurance. License Mobility does not apply to SPLA, Service Provider License Agreement. Based on the survey question before, we do understand that many of you today are on SPLA, so this slide may or may not apply to you. Like I said, license mobility is a benefit of software assurance, so your licenses must be covered by software assurance. And it can be used for many different software products, like SQL Server, like Exchange, like SharePoint, like System Center, Dynamics, etc. It cannot be reassigned or moved to another server for 90 days. The move to another server is an implementation detail. The language Microsoft has in the spur, the usage rights, is fairly vague, and it leaves it at it cannot be reassigned for 90 days. It's up to you to interpret whether that's another server or another data center. Another restriction with license mobility is when it comes to certain products, including all operating systems. So if you had Windows Server or Windows 7 or Windows 8 or Windows 10, those licenses would not be covered by license mobility. So regardless of whether you have software assurance or not, you couldn't move your Windows Server over to a shared infrastructure according to Microsoft restrictions. And the same goes for licenses for Microsoft Office and some of those products in the Office family, such as Word, Excel, and Outlook. We're going to say a few words about Amazon EC2 dedicated infrastructure and all the different options that it enables. But before we do, we have another quick questionnaire.
Thank you, Dennis. We've now reached our final poll. Where are you hosting the majority of your customers' database workloads now? We'll take a moment to allow those answers to come in and move forward. Thank you.
All right. So while attendees are looking at the different answer choices, I'd like to point out that Amazon, not too long ago, announced the availability of a dedicated infrastructure in the form of either dedicated instances or dedicated hosts. We're going to discuss the different options and the scenarios that it enables. And it sounds like, based on the poll questions, many of you are hosting your Microsoft workloads either in your own data centers or private cloud environments. So with that as a segue, I'd like to say a few words about Amazon EC2 dedicated hosts. This is basically a dedicated environment where the entire physical server is given to you, dedicated to your workloads. It's fully dedicated to your workloads. That enables multiple different licensing options for you. It also enables a number of technical options for you. With dedicated hosts, you have control over how instances are placed on a physical server. You can continue to use the same server over time, even when instances are stopped and restarted, allowing you to observe the 90-day reassignment rule that we discussed in the previous slide. It also integrates well with VM import and export, so you can move existing VM images, including software license keys, to AWS, though this last feature is available elsewhere in the AWS cloud as well, without the dedicated hosts. Comparing dedicated hosts to standard EC2 instances, on the left-hand side, you see standard Amazon EC2 instances placed on a physical host. In standard instances, our servers are multi-tenant, and they host instances for multiple customers' workloads. And AWS determines which hosts instances run on, and you pay per instance. So you can provision a certain virtual machine. You do not have, as a customer, control over which physical host that virtual machine is affinited to. And then it could be that your virtual machine is running side by side with another customer's virtual machine. Of course, they will be fully isolated with extremely thick walls between the virtual machines and with performance guarantees, both in terms of compute as well as storage, up to over 40,000 IOPS, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, but it will be multi-tenant nevertheless. And then, as we discussed, some Microsoft licensing options, in fact, many Microsoft licensing options, especially for operating systems that come from Microsoft, do not allow importing of Microsoft customers' existing licenses over to a multi-tenant cloud. To overcome that challenge on the right-hand side, we do have dedicated hosts, and dedicated hosts are single-tenant servers that host instances only for one customer's workloads. You can determine which host instances run on, and then you pay per host. In other words, even if you do not use the entire host, even if you have a single virtual machine running on a very large host that can accommodate multiple virtual machines, if you go the dedicated host path, we ask you to pay for the entire physical piece of hardware. In medium between those two options would be dedicated instances, not to be confused with dedicated hosts. Dedicated instances allow you to run your virtual machine on a physical hardware that is dedicated to you. And regardless of whether you're on a single virtual machine on that physical piece of hardware or multiple virtual machine, you still pay per virtual machine. That's the in between dedicated instances option. The challenge with dedicated instances, it tends to be a little bit more expensive than dedicated hosts should you fully utilize that physical piece of hardware. Dedicated hosts tend to be a little bit more cost effective if you have high utilization compared to dedicated instances. And they're a little bit more flexible too. With that said, talking about flexibility, instance host affinity allows you to comply with the 90-day rule. So 90-day reassignment becomes a non-issue if you go the dedicated host path. It will give you per core and per socket visibility. So if you have your own SPLA, dedicated host is the best bet because we'll tell you exactly how many cores and how many sockets on that dedicated piece of hardware, so you can tap into the different options that Microsoft licensing allows you. It also has some placement controls, actually pretty detailed placement controls, to ensure that instances run on the server that you want them to, helping you with the most stringent compliant and regulatory requirements, especially if you're regulated by industry standards such as HIPAA, or if you're a government contractor. Dedicated hosts will give you some pretty broad set of options to stay compliant with those regulatory compliance requirements. AWS Config, a tool that we have that is free for AWS customers, allows you to record when instances start, stop, or terminated, and that can come in handy for license reporting and true-ups. With that said, I'd like to hand it over to Aaron closing.
Thank you, Dennis and Scott. Thank you. We recommend signing up for the Amazon Partner Network at aws.amazon.com/partners. The AWS Partner Network, or APN, is the global partner program for AWS. It is focused on helping partners build a successful AWS-based business by providing great business, technical, marketing, and GTM support. APN is a tiered program comprised of consulting and technology partners who graduate through the tiers based on their level of engagement with AWS. In addition, partners can join fundamental programs designed to support their unique AWS-based business. Learn more about APN and partner programs below on this slide, and also feel free to email me directly for more information, and I'll have our APN team follow up with you directly. Now let's go ahead and move on to the final Q&A with Dennis and Scott. And if you have not already, please use either the chat window or email me directly to post your questions.
Hello
So
again. This
looks
is
like
Scott.
yeah, go for it.
Oh, go ahead. All right.
Oh,
I just wanted to mention I've answered a couple of questions in the Q&A panel, and I hope you can see those answers about pricing for dedicated hosts and about connecting line of business applications to AWS workspaces. Also, the poll is still open. Please go ahead and rate your satisfaction on the final survey question that we have. If you are full screen, please just reduce the size of your presentation window so you can see that survey question. Back over to you, Aaron.
thank you, Scott. And so since most of our questions have been answered, I'll follow up with any other open items that are on our Q&A window. So thank you again for joining us today. The session will be available to you all on demand and is one of a series leveraging EC2 dedicated hosts on AWS. Again, feel free to email me at ehunter@csgservices.com with any questions, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.